couple of years ago at winter count, I announced that I was going down to visit some Tarahumara friends of mine in Chihuahua, in northern Mexico. They're Tarahumara tribe of basically migrating farmers. But there's one village that's so poor they don't have any other land to move to, so they get pretty hungry. And so that's the village I was focusing on raising food money. When I told them how much money we had gathered, they said, great, but we can't use it until we talk to everybody in the village. All the grandmas, all the grandpas, everybody. It's not a governor or government decided thing, it's a group decided thing. And they have to have consensus. And so that took a while. So a year or so later, I arrived on an appointment day that they had given me, and they said, could you come back in June? So in June, I came back ready for the big meeting, and they said, no meeting's taken place. And so here I was wondering how we're going to proceed. Feels really good to be here today. I'm remembering our order of things that we did trying to get to a village called Recochare, which means pecking stone in Raramuri language or Tarahumara language. They live in the Copper Canyon region or the Sierra Tarahumara, which are the mountains surrounding Copper Canyon, Mexico, or Barrancas del Cobre. I've been traveling to visit friends there since I met them at a marathon in Tucson in the late 80s, early 90s, a marathon called the Tucson Fun Run. And so our friendship's been developing over the years. And one winter, realizing that my buddies were getting pretty hungry most of the time when it didn't rain enough, I would see if I could generate some food money by announcing at a gathering called Winter Count in Maricopa, Arizona, that I was going to visit some people who needed food. And expecting a couple of $100, I was surprised when in 5, 10s, and 20s, we generated about $1,500. And then over the years, trying to figure out how to actually spend that on food in that outback region has been difficult, and it's grown to about $2,000 at this point. So after several attempts to figure out how to ethically pass out money in the form of food, the people of that village said, well, we can make a decision, but we have to get a consensus. And the consensus has taken a long time, and they eventually came to a date of June, middle of June. They said, come in June. June's a good time to show up because it's the farthest from the harvest. It's the longest time from when we'll have been able to gather any food and / grow and harvest any food. So come in June and we'll have a big meeting, and whatever the elders decide, what all the people get together and agree on, we'll do it. And they made me promise. And so I kept my promise, and two friends came along, Andrew Belcher and Isaac Anderson. We all got together, made it to the village of Recochare, and they notified us as we were eating dinner and talking that nobody had talked about anything. There hadn't been any consensus or even any mention of the money. And so we talked about lots of options, how it is that we could maybe get employment generated, which is what we're mostly looking for. We don't really want to pass out welfare. We want people to gain some kind of self-generated employment. And so this was just a resource to try to help something improve, keep people from starving to death. A lot of children have died of simple diseases that killed them because they weren't eating enough food. They were malnourished. So we were trying to figure out how to improve life somehow, like a lot of gringos do, by adding money to the equation. And it wasn't really working so far. It hasn't worked so far. At times it's been maybe even a nuisance. But something happened here last time that we were there. As we We hiked off into the mountains with our friends. They guided us to the house of a young Mennonite missionary and his Tarahumara wife, who has now become a full member of the tribe, has gone native, so to speak, and his faith in God and his faith in people has increased, but he's become a Tarahumara who's dedicated to his people. A Mennonite Tarahumara, a Christian Tarahumara, which all Tarahumaras aren't necessarily members of the Catholic Church like a lot of people think. So after figuring out that there wasn't any meeting, there was nothing happening in terms of what our mission was about, we began to look at options, and we asked about some Jesuit priests that were working in the mountains, and would they be a good place to donate the money to, because they can spread it out knowing who needs it. And then I also remembered a good friend of mine that I really love, a man named Jonathan, who he's a Mennonite who's married into the tribe now and has become a Tarahumara. He's a Mennonite Tarahumara, an amazing man, and very much dedicated to his wife's people. And so they're his people. I'm a good friend of his father-in-law way before he got married. I knew his wife when she was a little girl. Just a great family, good people, and I thought these folks would have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the mountains here. So we got our friends to hike us over to Jonathan's place through the hard country, and he told us a lot of things. And he said that he wasn't really comfortable being a money holder, but he did know people occasionally that had trouble getting through the winter. And so he said maybe he'd think about it. Well, the good news is after a long discussion and lots of talking, especially teaching him and his friends how to make arrowheads, and we discussed a lot of other amazing things, our friendship deepened, and our time together was rich. And about 4 or 5 months later, he sent us an email to the United States and said that Felipe Torres's father, Domingo, was basically on the edge of starvation. An older man in his 80s with lots of mouths to feed. And he said maybe it would be a good idea to get him some basic supplies. And so he sent me a list of the basic supplies that he thought would be good. He went and asked Domingo what he wanted. We put the list together, and I added the idea that maybe we should send in some cans of fish, because Tarahumaras love fish. And so I went ahead and sent the money down. And I thought I was going to spend a lot of money, and turns out that it took $150 to stack up a lot of food. But we have a way now to make sure that the money all goes into food and then gets delivered to people who need it through our friend, Mennonite missionary. I don't even know if he's a missionary anymore so much as just a person who loves people and loves God and loves to serve. So he's a Tarahumara who's helping take care of the people around him at this point. And I'm really confident that we've made a good choice with Jonathan in terms of a safe place to keep our promise to donators that all of their money goes into food, not 1% or 10% or a certain percentage. We pay all the costs of transportation. We pay all the costs of delivery or whatever. And 100% of the money goes into food items that are wanted by people who need the food. We still haven't reached our full dream, which is to generate some kind of employment around that, where people get paid for doing the work of delivering the food. Tarahumaras pick up the food, put it on their shoulders, walk it 40 miles through the backcountry, and deliver it to somebody who's worse off than they are, and then they get to keep a percentage of that food for having done the labor, or they get to go back and get their load for having delivered a load to someone who isn't able to walk. We're looking for ways, we're dreaming about it. So anybody who's watching this might see in their mind some clearer way to generate employment around delivering food. I would like to hear their thoughts on this. But there's a certain amount of success we reached in that one family head who is in charge of about 30 people, his family ate well for a while this winter because of our attempts to try to find some equitable way to not turn people into welfare cases, but it helped them be excited and happy and live long enough to move on to whatever they want to do next with their lives. That's where we've gotten to so far. So far, about 5 or 6 of our trips in the past have been directly involved in us going to learn natural life skills or Tarahumara life skills on how to make a living the way Tarahumaras make a living. So we've generated quite a few classes that are all about learning what Tarahumaras can teach us, and we pay them to be our teachers. That's been a successful thing. There's, like in a lot of poor, small native communities, for some reason, jealousy is their biggest bane. They create their own problems by getting angry about somebody else making a living when they're not getting one. So we try to spread that out as thin as possible and just make sure everybody gets something. But we've been successful at times. We've had a lot of backers that have, like a lot of Americans, get excited for a little while and then they get bored and then they quit. So me and a few of my friends have continued to get there several times a year, and now that people are afraid to travel in Mexico because of exaggerated fear-based news, we don't get as many people wanting to come down, but I still make it once or twice a year, and I'm planning on going right after winter count again this year. And so our trips are either educational on our part, meaning that we get rich, beautiful lessons from people who still are doing things that our ancestors were doing about 2,000 years ago. So for anybody who wants to learn some sustainable life ways, people in parts of Mexico have never quit. So they're not relearning something like a lot of us northerners. They're still doing what they've always done. It's getting harder. There's less and less support. Not that there ever was a lot, but now there's actually people working against you if you're trying to live on the land. I guess the Spaniards arrived and tried to keep people from doing that. Lots of people have been working against that for a long time, but Tarahumaras are still making it in some little pockets. And we're trying to help those who are the least successful because of new developments in land tenure. They're making it illegal to be a migratory farmer. So it was already a hard life, and now they're saying you got to stay in one spot and farm, which doesn't work in that part of the world. And so we're trying to just be part of the cure, not part of the problem. And we're not always sure which side of that line we're on. We keep asking them how they feel about it. Tarahumaras have told me many times, quit trying to take care of us, quit trying to think for us, and just allow us to think up what we want, and then if you can help us, and if you can't, just come visit. My favorite time I've ever gone to visit the Tarahumara was with my nephew, William, who wanted to go to Mexico for his graduation present from high school. We went down there on a survival trip with no gear. We took a 14-inch bush knife, t-shirts and Levi's, and sandals, and walked off into the bush looking to live out in the wild with the Tarahumaras. And it turns out that besides one cold night in a cave in a huge rainstorm, the rest of the time we ate really well staying at somebody's house, because every time the Tarahumaras saw us, they said, "Hey, you're David. You go visit Felipe. Why don't you visit our house? He's my cousin. Why do you always go to his house?" So we began to get invitations to eat and sleep everywhere. And so we had about an 8-day walk from house to house, eat survival trip, which wasn't really surviving. We were excited and happy and eating and learning a lot about people. And when they found out we had nothing, they were extremely friendly and helpful and gave us everything we needed. So I found out that they're more comfortable when you're not coming around trying to be Mr. Nice Guy, Santa Claus, welfare agent. a home teacher checking on you how you're doing. They're happier when you just show up with nothing and ask if you can have a place to lay down. So I'm not able to do that very often because I know for sure that somebody in the background is really happy when they see you lay down a heavy pack full of beans and rice or whatever, corn or food of any kind. So we're going again in February. Con el favor de Dios, we will have a good trip and make it in and out. I've gone there before and been totally sick and incapable of taking care of myself. I've gotten so sick I couldn't even leave. Sometimes I had to sleep for days while unable to be any good for anybody. I had to be taken care of. But most of the time, we try to go in and be of benefit to the people we visit. And God willing, we'll get good enough at it to not be the attack of the helping hand, but actually welcome friends with resources that are needed and helpful to the community. I'm looking, hopefully, for some young person who'd want to take over after me so I can get old and hear stories and not have to go there anymore. But right now I'm still capable and able, and I love traveling into that part of the world if anybody wants to come along.